Yes, more than happy to. Thank you, Mary. I'd like to read this resolution, and it states, whereas Anna Moffett, Board of Education member for the Madison Metropolitan School District, has successfully and selflessly served on the board since April 2015 as Vice President and Clerk, completing her 3-year term. Whereas Anna has continually advocated for the expansion of trauma-informed care and mental health services in schools and took on a special role as the chair, originating the ad hoc committee focused on effective use of the education resource officers in schools. Whereas Anna has been instrumental in the development of MMSD's Special Education Plan, which seeks to improve services outcomes for students with disabilities in an inclusive education model. Whereas Anna is well known for being one of the community's most influential advocates for children with disabilities and their families, and has been intimately involved in community decisions affecting underrepresented groups. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Madison Metropolitan School District Board of Education recognizes and greatly values Anna Moffett's dedication to the MMSD schools. Her work and legacy will continue to have a lasting positive impact in our schools, for our students, for our families, and for the community. Be it further resolved, this statement be permanently imprinted in the Board of Education minutes for the meeting of April 16, 2018.
Hear, hear.
And the resolution can never go further enough in expressing our gratitude for her service and commitment to the Board of Education and this community. So, thank you all.
Thank you, James. Next on our agenda is public appearances, and we have a few public appearances. And we'll start with Tim Reitman? How is it?
Yeah,
Rittman. Great. Thanks, Tim. You have 3 minutes. And if you can speak into the microphones for recording.
Lights on.
Yep.
I think it's on. Thank you for hearing me. I just wanted to introduce myself. I've written a couple emails about the transition of the custodians into the unit from other units. For example, like security or EAs or other units into the custodial unit. I know that the handbook is finally making a change where the amendment is that all people that transfer into the unit will now have their years of service count for all the unit service they've done. So if they've worked for 16 years in security, they transfer to custodial, they get all 16 years, where in the past, you had to start fresh without any years of service in custodial, where if you were in custodial to start with, you worked 16 years, transferred over to security, you got all those 16 years to transfer. So finally things are kind of becoming equitable, and I appreciate that and the changes that has done for us as a unit. Also, the food service unit is included in that as well now, so that's a great change to come. And I'm here just kind of to represent, I know just like 10 of us that have transitioned already, and I know it's hard for me to ask for your support in that because I know we're just a few people, but I'm just looking for to recognize the fact that we have worked in the district, some of us for quite a while. I've been here since 2000, others as well, and that work that we did in other units, I feel like when we transferred, it just felt like it didn't count. Like the district didn't honor that. And while I appreciate it and I love the district, and of course I want to stay with the district, I just feel like the district didn't seem to appreciate all the years that I worked by not allowing those years to transfer over. And the fact being that many other units have been doing that for years, so it just felt like something was wrong and that it just wasn't noticed before. And so I just wanted to bring it up to everybody, and I'm glad the change is making, and I just ask that you bring along those of us that have been fighting for this. I know we're just a few. It sounds like it's around $32,000. I'm not sure for what all that goes to. I haven't seen the report or anything like that. you know, if there's any concessions or something there, I'm happy to work out anything in the meetings. But all we're looking for is that we can have those years of service count. It counts towards our longevity. We can put it towards, you know, our retirement as we get older. Here, our vacation time, you know, it's things that, you know, that really will help us as we go along. You know, each year I get a certificate from the district that says how many years, or each 5 years, you know, and I got one for 15 years. And when I got to the custodial, it was at the same time where they took away those years. So it was really, that's kind of where this kind of spurred it. I just feel like it just wasn't right. It just feels like something that I think we can all be on board with to help, you know, just, I know we're only 10, but just 10 of us to just move forward. And thank you very much for listening to my speech.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Great. Next is Neil Rainford.
Good evening. My name is Neil Rainford. I'm here representing the employees of the district who are in the custodial and food service group, and are also members of AFSCME Local 60. I'm here tonight to talk about the upcoming budget and to ask that you budget for the full increase that's provided for under the law. That increase is 2.13% or thereabouts for the coming cycle. And I want to share a little bit of perspective. I also represent the employees at the county and at the city of Madison, who are also the other primary local government employees in the community. And I think it's worth noting as you kind of face these decisions in this coming budget that the city and the county have been able to, over the past couple of years, really reverse a lot of the hardships that the local government employees at the school district, as well as the employees, the local government employees in those other organizations have been seeing since 2011. The increases since 2011 have really, you know, far and away not kept up with inflation. And what the city was able to do over the last 4 years is to provide increases that were about 2% a year for total lifts. Some years as high as 4.5%, other years as low as 1%, but again, averaging over the last 4 years about 8% of wage increase. Likewise, over at the county, those employees have seen increases that have been back-to-back 3% increases. One as a dollar amount in the first year of about 82 cents, and the second year as a 3% increase. And those have really significantly kind of reversed the fortunes of those other municipal employees in our community. But who's really been left behind, you know, since that 2011 and the really very small wage increases that have been provided for both under the law and under the school district budgets, and you know, municipal. Well, the school district budgets for the moment are those school district employees. You know, I understand that we've wisely provided for here as a district the capacity for that kind of an increase with the modifications we did to the taxable sort of features of the organization last year, and so I'm just here to you know, kind of provide some context, what else is happening in the community, and to ask you to go ahead and you know, stand by those employees who have really made long-term concessions over the last several years. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, next is Maddie Reese.
Hello. First time here. I have a few concerns about the students, especially the mental health students in the high schools. And one of my concerns is because my own son has a mental health, and he has an IEP, and a situation happened and I wasn't called. I don't believe that the proper things were conducted that was supposed to be conducted. So my main concern of being here today is because I truly have an issue with the school board with children who have IEPs and have mental health and not being treated correctly. So I don't have a lot to say here. This is my first meeting. You guys will be seeing my face. I'm going to find out when you're having these meetings all the time. I have a little group that I formed. We're going to come down. We're going to get involved because I'm very concerned about the school board, well, the schools handling our children, especially African American children. And I don't want to just single out African American children, but I'm talking about my child right now. And I believe that board handbook, I never got one until my child had an incident at West High School. I didn't even know about the school handbook policy. So I came into the board, asked for a handbook. Hopefully it's in my email by now. And I have more concerns. I think that you guys are here talking about the budget today. I'm not sure, but I believe that that needs to be part of the budget, that we need to get some mental health inside of these schools. I mean, truly, because these kids are suffering, and the ones who already have mental health issues, it needs to be on hand. And that's about it.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, and last is Doug Keeler.
Last but not least.
I was going to say that, Doug, but I didn't know.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I am always thankful for your service, and I appreciate the fact you started out with the comments you made for Anna. I was going to say the same thing, but I think I'll wait till she's present, and then we'll convey that in the meeting. I just want to take a few minutes just to kind of speak to what you have before you tonight, the budget development. I'll make sure that I'm not repeating too much of what you heard from Neil. I did want to chime in real quickly on Tim's comments, just to say that I would really urge you to support what they're looking for there. The language they're talking about is language that's been applicable to MTI employees for probably 25 years and was only recently changed for the Local 60 folks. So I think what they're asking for is something that other employees have actually come to expect, that recognition of their years of service as they moved between units. So just to put that out there, not the reason to speak, but to make sure I didn't miss an opportunity to support that. So looking at your operations work group presentation tonight, the three things I want to speak to: SEA recommendations that came out of the employee handbook. I see that's still something that needs some action, and I'm hoping that you folks can take some action sometime in the near future to accept those recommendations to change their salary schedule. That's something we worked on through the handbook process to address that $15 per hour compression issue. Long-term substitute rate of pay, the same thing. That's on your agenda here tonight too. You need to act on both of those things. That was increased in long-term substitute rate of pay to make that more competitive to surrounding areas. That came out of the employee handbook. So just to put a note that those things still require your action. Second thing, as Neil mentioned, but just briefly, we are going to be beginning base wage bargaining, right? We still can bargain one item in this state, and that is base wages. The governor allows us to bargain up to a cost of living increase, and we've done that each of the last 2 years. It's our full expectation we're going to do that again this year. We're going to be counting on you folks to provide the budget to make that happen. Bargaining starts May 2nd. That's when we're going to exchange. And I just want you folks, as you're preparing for your budget discussions, to be cognizant of that date and the fact we're going to start bargaining that. Cost of living increases. The cost of living since 2011 has increased by about 13.5%. Base wages in the district during that same time period have increased about 2.6%. All right? Our base wages, frankly, have just not kept up with the cost of living. That was one of the reasons why this year you folks increased the teacher hiring rate by 10%. Right? Last year we funded health insurance changes to provide revenue to increase the hiring rate. One of the reasons we had to do that is that base hiring teacher salary has not maintained with the rate of inflation for a decade. So now last year you did a 10% increase to bump it back up again. But if we don't do a cost of living for next year, right, that increase is already starting to erode compared to cost of living. So throw that into the mix there. And then the last thing I want to talk a little bit about is you also have some discussion tonight about some targeted pay increases. Right at the beginning of the school year in the fall, we heard Am I done already?
You
That was
know,
3
and
minutes?
I actually was a little late on starting it, too.
Really?
But you know what, since you're the last one, Doug?
I'll just make this
We're
real
done.
quick then.
Yep.
Some of my time was for Tim, remember, so that goes on to
That's
his
true,
thing.
yeah, okay.
So the last thing I was going to say is, at the start of the school year, we saw that compensation was really supposed to be a lead item in this budget, a lead priority item. When we first met with the district in November, we were thinking about possibly another $4.5 million coming on to make some pretty dramatic, consider some pretty dramatic changes to teacher salary schedule. By February, April, that's down to about $1.5 million. The money we thought was there isn't there. And I think if there's one thing I'd urge you folks is really what we're looking at right now is cost of living increase for everybody. We still want to explore changes, bigger changes down the road, but if 1.5 million doesn't give you any big change, right? And the target increases, we're wanting to explore those targeted ones too, but we think that's got to follow the base wage increases for everybody. So thanks for the extra 30 seconds, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so the next item is actually our 2018-19 budget development, compensation and priority actions. Jen, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Mary. We got Mike, Deirdre, and Lisa. Oh, not Deirdre, sorry. Mike and Lisa, who are going to be helping with the budget presentation tonight. As a reminder to everyone, this is our final presentation and pre-delivery of the draft preliminary budget before we present that to you in just a couple of weeks. So this is an important meeting for us. We're excited. We think this is shaping up to be a fairly strong budget. There are lots of districts in the state of Wisconsin who are facing some very serious challenges when it comes to budget, and we're just very fortunate, mainly to the taxpayers of Madison, for putting us in a better financial position than most. So we want to take advantage of it. We've been working hard, as you know. We're in the midst of rewriting our strategic framework. So while we're rewriting the strategic framework, we're wanting to make sure that the budget as it emerges aligns with those same goals and priorities. So we're going to try to make those connections for you tonight. Our major our goal for tonight is to tie up any loose ends and updates on the budget. We generally have a rule that by the time we give you the draft preliminary budget at the end of April, we don't want there to be any new news in there. Everything in it should have been discussed by the board at some time. So we're trying to tie up those loose ends. We want to give you a little more meat on the priority projects. We have a very short list of priority actions embedded in the budget this year, and we want to make sure you understand them before delivery of the budget and we have any remaining questions answered. And we want to touch on TID 25, which is the schedule for expenditures related to that one-time funding source. We want to touch on that tonight, since it is part of the draft preliminary budget that you'll see in a couple of weeks. So that's the game plan. We got some strategic places to pause, and we'll be bringing up some guests to explain some things later on in the budget presentation. I'll hand it over to Mike.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it. So here we go. Here we go. Okay.
I think the last
like a
time this
trick
happened,
thing?
and it required Barb did some magic over there and got it going.
Okay.
Yeah, don't bang it on the table.
Throw it at the screen. What do you suggest?
Is it on?
Battery? Everything's retired.
Battery. Could be that.
It's so awkward. We should test this before the meeting, don't you think?
We usually do.
Yeah, we do.
That'll work for now anyway. All right, we're going to try to move quickly because we do have some guest speakers or members of our leadership team to talk about priority actions tonight, and to make up for all the time that Doug went over on his comments. So, this is kind of a quick review of where we've been on budget development, starting back in November, if you can see that little timeline on the far left. So back in November and December, we were previewing some of the key items on staffing and on compensation, class size policy. And while the weather hasn't changed, the budget has certainly developed since that time. The board adopted its goals, principles, and went into some of the major sections during the winter, including staffing policy, priority actions overview, and so on. That brings us to tonight, April. And as Jen said, this is our last chance to preview the major pieces that are in this budget. It's a chance for you to, as board members, to either confirm that there's an item of interest that's in the budget, or call to our attention that there's something not in the budget that you would like to see in the budget. We will actually present the preliminary proposal to you at April 30th, as it says at the bottom of the screen. And even there, a reminder that that is the beginning of a 2-month process. It's not the end. It's not a complete proposal. It is a starting point from which the board will obviously make whatever amendments are necessary. With that, I think we're going to, yeah. Okay, so is this working? Okay, great. Thank you, Barb. I appreciate it.
Sorry.
A reminder about the overall district enrollment trend. It's been, statistically very steady over the years. This is the students in seats count. There are many different types of enrollment count. This is our 4K through 12 students in seats. We're expected to be down very slightly, down about 44 kids next year. Ultimately, we'll find out in September what the real result is. But this is one of the major assumptions for budget development. The guiding principles were previewed and edited back several months ago. And really, I'm going to move quickly through these. I just want to focus on the 18-19 column on the far right. And hopefully, you'll hear these topics addressed later in this presentation, or certainly over the next 2 months. So some of the principles that we thought were important enough to get on this screen were, as you can see, allocating resources for greatest impact on students, raising achievement and narrowing gaps, focusing on a more narrow set of priority actions. You'll see that tonight. Multi-year perspective on sources and uses. That will be in play for the next 2 months. I think that's your compensation versus tax levy discussion. And then opportunities to innovate. I think you'll see that when we talk about the TID schedule, among other places. The budget goals that we presented a few months ago, alignment, as Jen just mentioned, alignment to the goals which will emerge from the next phase of the framework. That's something to listen for over the next couple of months. Promoting recruitment, selection, and retention with additional support from the comp plan. Comp plan remains front and center in this budget. Equitable use of resources, as always. And then transparency, especially around our new guidelines on class size. So hopefully all of those remain relevant to this discussion. So this is our high-level strategy that we created going into this budget. And we're going to go through this section and pause before we get to the priority action in-depth discussion. Okay, so this is both a high-level strategy and items that we wanted to address in this budget. And so this gets a bit repetitive, but first, improve the compensation plan. Second, maintain stability in employee benefits, and that's new for tonight, and we can talk about that. We think we have a win on that. Create a staffing plan aligned to class size policy. We think we already have a win on that. And then the focus set of priority actions we'll talk about. Repurposing as necessary. That'll come up especially starting with the full budget presentation. And then managing the tax levy. We'll talk about the tax levy more in a second. So essentially, I think that before I move off of this, just in terms of high-level strategy, we have some powerful enabling conditions that Jen made reference to. The November 16 referendum that gave the board more levy authority is really a key asset. The TID 25 promissory note that we arranged, those are both local actions, are really very helpful. And then strong tax base growth. The city posts its own update on tax base growth. It just came out on Friday, so it's not in the presentation officially. It's called the April tax letter. The city is reporting 7.4% tax base growth, the highest it's been in years for a single year gain, of which more than a third is new construction, over $600 million of new construction. So that will help as part of the overall levy discussion. Those are all enabling conditions. The challenges, I think, are going to be around the loss of equalization aid, which drives tax levy. The 2X charters, which we have to fund, will be a challenge. Getting safety and security plan up and running and funding it, I think, is another challenge. Then the tax levy itself. So those are some of the big pieces that are still on the chessboard. You've got a nice opportunity around compensation to address something that we've not addressed for a while. And I think also an opportunity to do some one-time spending on land and some other major one-timers due to the fact that the overall financial reserves are in good shape. So that's kind of the whole chessboard in one brief slide. Here's some more on it. You've seen this slide before. The pie chart on the left is us trying to fund or attach dollars to the items we just described. And going clockwise, the first three are all about compensation. There's a traditional compensation plan, which for us is steps and lanes and a base wage allocation, which we'll talk about more in a second. There's a targeted strategy, and then there's the benefits piece. It's about 3/4 of that pie. We introduced the 2X independent charters a couple months ago, and you've got priority actions tonight, and then sort of the all other bucket. You've seen that before. Those are still basically the major variables. On the right are some of the key parameters that are involved here. Enrollment is slight decrease, level staffing, narrower priorities, compensation options, updated tax levy. And this last bullet I think is important. Using less than your full tax levy authority based on this set of assumptions. You can change the assumptions. But in this version, we're using 5 of your $8 million of full levy authority. Again, in our take on this, we're trying to balance the spending priorities, the tax levy, proper positioning for the second year. A lot goes into that. Ultimately, the board will figure out where to land on that. Okay, this is our early, still snow on the ground, I'm happy to say, for this reason only, April early tax levy forecast. 4.5% levy increase. This was at 4. We always targeted to not exceed 4. It got pushed to 4.5 or 4.58 when we introduced $1.5 million worth of funding for independent charter schools. So that's a stacked bar chart that shows on the bottom the local spending decisions of a little over $5 million as being kind of the first piece that contributes to our tax levy increase. The largest piece is actually the second one, which is projected state equalization aid loss that gets switched essentially from state aid to local property taxes. And then third, the top piece, the most recent, is another $1.5 million to fund the independent charters. I should emphasize that the equalization aid estimate is just an estimate at this point. I have it at minus 13.5%. It's always tough to call. It's based, this is aid we receive next year. It's based on this year's actual results for our district and every other district. Those actual results can't be known until, well, June 30th is the end of the year, and it takes a couple months to process. So nobody really knows what the average cost per student is across the state or in any one district or how you rate. So we've taken a conservative position that might improve. It's frustrating because we won't know for sure until October 15th when it's almost too late to do anything with it. The other thing that we're monitoring is the 2X charters. This depends entirely on their enrollment, which is all new. I'd call this a cautious estimate. It's not worst case. This is cautious, and we'll have to see. Okay, the key thing here is the levy won't be set until October. It's early. I just want to make you aware of it. Now, we can't really go any further into next November's levy, but we can talk a little bit about recent levy history. This chart, I think, is interesting, especially the bar chart on the left. It shows that for 5 years, we were stuck in a situation where our tax levy was growing faster than our tax base, which is not where you want to be. That was caused by the recession, essentially, and lack of state aid. But in 16-17, that pattern reversed and started to get back to what was more normal, and that recurred in 17-18. We think in 18-19, we're going to see a pattern similar to 17-18, which is positive. It makes it more affordable for everybody. We have a couple of items that are on the agenda, but not in the April preliminary budget. Based on board discussions, these either will or will not be dropped into the June update. These are items that are not in competition with anything else because we're proposing to fund these out of district reserves. The reserves have improved over the last 5 years, so we're in a position to do this. Some shorthand on the general fund balance. It's targeted to be no less than 10% of our spending and no more than 15%. So if you round our spending to about $400 million, then we should have a reserve somewhere between 40 to 60 million. And we're right in the middle of that, which means it's possible for us to take on these possible issues. We're still working on a land acquisition for the west growth area out near north of Olson for $2 million. We have an opportunity to get $3 million worth of technology infrastructure paid for via E-rate if we do a 20% match. That's the middle item. And lastly, safety and security plan. The state has a $100 million fund, grant-based fund, to allow school districts to improve their safety and security plan. We think that we need to augment that with local, not a match. We think it's our own local decision to do that. We just don't know how much. It really depends on how much money we get from the state and what our plan calls for. Those are not in the April presentation, but they will be part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think it'd be
pause
good,
here,
Mike,
yes.
if but let's keep the questions narrowed to just the points that Mike has made.
Okay.
Nikki?
2 questions. One, when do the 2X charters have to report their enrollment? What date, like, will we know that? Before October? Do they have to tell us by September 1st?
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure. We're hoping to learn more. Yeah.
And the other one on the long-term plan, is there any way we could find out how much air conditioning costs? Because I'm hearing that from a lot of parents and a lot of people.
Yes, yes, that's absolutely doable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Teacher?
Slide 9, the local budget number at the bottom. Can you talk a little bit about that? The 5, 6 it's the slide 9 is one more back. The local budget number at the bottom. Can you?
Yeah.
What does that represent? The 5.
Yeah. So it represents the portion of the overall tax levy increase that's really attributed to our local spending decisions. It's really the part that's on us. Basically, you take the $204 per student from the state and that's the core of our spending plan.
That kind of opens up just overall just Fund 10 budget. Let's leave all the other funds aside.
Yeah.
what's the percentage and/or dollar growth that you're building the budget? Or what kind of neighborhood are you in with what you're going to present us at the end of the month?
Yeah, 2.86% spending increase.
Okay.
It's really kind of what this slide is really hoping to illustrate is
That's
the levy's 4.58, but our spending increase is only 2.86.
okay.
And the difference is that aid loss. Really.
Right. And that's just Fontana alone, or is
Yeah.
that okay? Yeah, just trying to get a feel
Yeah.
where things are. And the other thing is just kind of a comment on the. It's certainly in many ways better to have property values increasing. And as you pointed out, a third of that is from new construction, but 2/3 of that increase is coming from increased assessments on current property
Right.
owners. And those are very uneven. And just, our assessment went up 12%, which means that if we were flat, we would have a 12% increase. And that's something that I think as we go forward, to understand that 1/3 of this is being taken by new construction, and
The other part is not.
that's just gravy as far as existing property tax owners are, payers are. But the other is, it's a hit or miss. It's, it's better, so.
Right. Okay.
Kate?
On the safety and security plan, are we going to be able to see, I know you guys have been working on a full kind of assessment. Are we going to be able to see that before we make decisions here?
Certainly by June, but it won't be ready for the April proposal. I would imagine the May meeting would likely be an obvious point for
Outline
updating on the
May,
safety
maybe
and
finish
security
it by
plan.
June.
Okay. And that
Yeah.
assessment will have kind of what the recommendation is around
Right.
investment in facilities, et cetera.
Right.
Okay. So we'll get that after we make kind of a preliminary approval of the budget.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. And again, we're anticipating that we could take that out of reserve so it wouldn't affect this budget. It wouldn't displace something else in this budget. And then I think we can adjust that based on probably December, January, before we find out what the state contribution to our plan is going to be.
Okay.
Okay?
Wait,
I put it
Wait.
differently. We didn't want to wait until December
I'm
to get
next.
moving.
to
Yeah.
piggyback off of TJ's comments about homeowners' property taxes, rent has also skyrocketed. We have many staff that rent, and it's a makeup year for a year that got held the year before. For a while, 2 years ago or so, the rents they stayed about stagnant, but for my job, I get a HUD-funded report that puts caps on what I can spend in rent or what I can charge in rent. And 2 years ago, they stayed the same, which was surprising but then this year they made up for it big time. What's called the fair market rate in rent has gone up extraordinary. So rents are going up all over. I've gone to affordable housing programs, grand openings, and was met by a lot of our staff who live there, which is fine. These are wonderful buildings, and they were brand new and they were cool places. But it's still there. You have to only make 80% of median income or under to be qualified to live there. So affordable housing in Madison is, I consider, beyond a crisis. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to catch up. So the rents that a lot of our staff have to pay has gone up significantly from one year to the next, which, along with the property tax that whoever does own homes that work for us is going to have to eat as well. So I just want to make sure that people are renting. Their percentage of increase is higher than property tax increase.
So caution on the tax levy is what I'm hearing.
I'm not, I don't want to shy away from taking that calculation into what we compensate our staff to make up what cost of living is clearly just the cost of housing as that's calculated into the COL.
That's a good point.
It's different this year, and this is just something that's brand new. People's rents are going up big time.
Yeah. Well, that might be a good
Mhm.
segue into compensation.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
good.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, the middle section of this presentation is on some of the key factors that are in the budget, and then we're going to pause before we get to priority actions. The compensation factors that are in the budget or that will be addressed during the next few months include, and you've seen this slide before, this is kind of our standard approach to compensation components. This funds steps and lanes across all salary schedules at 4.2 million, including lane movement for 400K, and then base wage. Both Neil and Doug spoke to this already. Our position here as we do the April budget includes a 0.5% increase on the base wage for $1 million. That is the same position we started out at last year. As Doug pointed out, we bought up to 1.26% using health insurance savings. Overall, this is about a 2.5% across the board average total increase for our employees. And that is kind of where this discussion begins. As you know, base wage is subject to, is a mandatory, maybe, I guess the mandatory subject of bargaining. And the cap on that, remember it's a ceiling, not a floor, is 2.13% base wage increase. So conceivably, you could be looking at steps, lanes, and a maximum 2.13% on base wage. And there will be a series of decisions associated with that compensation strategy. We have, as you know, an additive compensation strategy. This has already been previewed. I'll just focus on the middle, the highlighted one, which is the $1 million allowance, if you budgetary allowance, to fund stipends, essentially, for what we've been calling hard to fill or hard to keep positions. This is based on turnover statistics for cross-cat and bilingual teaching positions, 1 million out of the 1.5 million. For your frame of reference, every $2 million is 1% base wage. Okay, so $1 million here is equivalent to 0.5% of base wage. Okay, and then that was the rationale for the hard to fill. Again, those are your turnover statistics over on the left side of the screen. And then this was also mentioned I think by Doug during the comments section. These are items coming out of the employee handbook discussions, and you will have an opportunity to build that into your compensation strategy as well. Lastly, on compensation, health insurance, obviously a big piece of the compensation puzzle. We set this budget up with goal of keeping the health insurance rate increase at no more than 4%. Again, without doing plan design changes or changes to the employee premium contributions. We did a series of round-robin negotiations. Deirdre and Rochelle from HR were key in that work, as was Doug. And after a series of meetings, we're happy to report as of late last week that both GHC and Dean's HMO renewals are under 4%. We do not have to do plan design changes to make that happen. It stays in its lane in the budget, which is good news. It simplifies things generally. There'll be more to come on some of the details of this, but at least for now, you just need to know that it fits into the overall strategy. So that's good news, I think, on health insurance. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions on
Compensation.
comp. It's kind of a quick review.
TJ?
And then we'll get started.
Not tonight, but the, just for the April budget or a supplement to it, details on the principal and administrative realignment pieces. I don't know if I don't expect them tonight, but it's something that I think that how those are structured are something that I think that the board should be interested in, and how they play out. More generally, with the exception of the EA unit, I am very, very supportive of a COLA increase, which would be 2.13, which would comes out to about, if we didn't do the targeted, and that's still an additional 2.26 million. and that we would either
It's
have to
about-
do on the levy or have to do from reallocations from elsewhere. And that's a big chunk at this point. But just as a general thing that I would prefer the across the board to the cross-categorical bilingual stipend. I think that I'm not sure how much impact that will have, and I do know that our neighboring districts are doing over 2, as much as 2.5. I've heard from Monona Grove as an across the board. And I think that not only I think that we are in danger of what are now relatively easily filled positions becoming hard to fill positions if we don't keep up with that pace.
Nikki and then Dean.
Got a second, TJ, on the COLA increase. I've been for that. We'll continue to be for that. We've stated we would like to work on teacher morale. I think the number one way you work on teacher morale is to pay them what they're worth. I think that's the most important thing, and therefore I'm very interested in that. Also, I think when we heard with the speakers, I think we should fund the $32,000 for those 10 people, because they didn't choose that, and technically the contract is changing, but they're getting left behind. And I don't think that's the most fair way of doing it.
Dean.
Yeah, the health negotiation is encouraging. Are you able to give us a potential round number, what that would be, of if it's under the 4% that we anticipated?
Oh, yeah, I think, top of my head, I think if you did a weighted average, probably 3.85, if you can, yeah.
Can you
I'd
put
say around there, a little
how
under
much money that would be?
Under 100,000.
Okay.
110. Yeah.
Well, that's a little
Yeah,
bit that we
that's
have,
something.
so we could put that towards base.
Yeah, I think that's
Well, I think if between, I would have to weigh in on the side of getting as close to we can as to COLA.
okay.
If not matching, it's just not gonna, you hate to have people lose ground, and it's just something, so if there's ways, if there are suggestions you have or that are things on the bubble that we could transfer to base, priority-wise, I would rate increasing base higher.
I do want to remind the board that we will have a closed session coming up to talk about the negotiations on base wage, just so you realize it's coming up in a couple weeks.
Right.
Mike, I have a question because, so we've heard some testimony with regards to where the city and the county are. When we look at that, does the city and the county have steps and lanes increases?
You know, good question. I think that I would actually expand that. I was gonna make that very comment about school districts. I think for everybody to have a fair and level playing field when we do comparables with other entities, I think the first question is, are steps and lanes included in their calculation? Then is base wage, how do they treat base wage? And then I think even the last part is, what do they do on benefit strategy? We've seen districts be very generous on base wage and then impose a wicked employee deductible on health insurance. So making sure we get all the components laid out in a table is really the only way to get at, I think, kind of a fairness standard to make sure we're comparing things equally. And I think that's pretty likely to be part of the presentation as we go forward. It's both school district, city, and county.
Okay, so you will be
Yes.
providing that. Okay, great. That'd be helpful. Kate?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The first, if you could set the ceiling for us, if we were to add in the base wage increase, that's an incremental $3 million, I think, on what we've got here. What does that equal in terms of levy increase as a percentage?
Okay, so let's see if we can do this. I think TJ's numbers
I think I
are
just did
essentially
it, so
correct. So
what'd you get?
we have, in this proposal, steps and lanes and 0.5% on base wage.
Yeah, so that's 1 million, so I added.
And if we wanted to get up to 2.13, that would be about a 1.6% lift. Each $2 million is 1% of base wage. So that would take about $3 million to do it.
Yep.
$3 million is 1% of our
Okay,
tax base, or $3 million is
so it's
another
5.5.
1% levy increase.
5.5% instead of 4.5%.
I'm sorry?
It's 5.5.
Exactly. It takes you from 4.5 to 5.5, and it takes you essentially from using $5 million of your levy authority to $8 million, all $8 million. So the good news is it's within your grasp. It's at the far end of your financial grasp, but you can do it.
Okay.
And then comes the discussion of can and should, and what is the balance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other, I guess, in January, I had asked a couple of questions around kind of creating funding with a couple of bigger moves that were potential, and we just haven't gotten any feedback on what those would be. The two, one was around multi-age classrooms, and the other wouldn't be something we could execute in 1 year, but it was around DLI. Yeah, I just wondered if you had any update there that you could share in terms of.
Yeah, I think we might talk about that a little bit during the priority action and the TID discussion here, and then ultimately it's going to come out in the.
No. She's shaking her head.
No, well, depends on how narrow you want it.
Not multi-age and DLI. We won't be talking about
Okay.
the priority actions.
Okay.
But it's
Okay.
on our budget tracker. We know.
Okay,
We
I mean, I
owe
know.
you some thoughts
We're
on
getting
that.
kind of late in the game here. We raised it in January, so they both are significant value creators in terms of freeing up funds. So I would love to have an opportunity for this group to talk about them to the degree they could free up multi-millions of dollars.
Yeah, so let's just spend a minute on that. Because I think your proposals, which were to encourage schools to go, and maybe through some change in parameters for schools to more frequently go to multi-age classrooms to minimize the outliers that are on the really small side.
classrooms, yep.
Yeah, which is already, I mean, that's already something schools can do. It would just be about encouraging more to do so. I mean, that is a school-based decision about multi-age. I'm trying to think, Kate, like, is that even possible in this year's decision-making
It may
for
not be at
schools?
this
And
point,
I
but-
don't think it is. I think we're far too long in terms of school-based staffing level decision-making. DLI, I mean, that's a really big,
No
complicated
question.
strategy. Certainly not something we would be putting into action for next year. So,
So we don't need to talk about it now.
Yeah.
I would like to get some estimates of the kind of, I mean, neither of these is small choices. Maybe neither of them is choices for this budget. They both are multi-million dollar choices that don't materially impact class size and would free up funds. So I would like to have the
Get
opportunity
it.
to talk about them.
okay.
And then I have one more for priority actions, but
James?
Yeah, if we have the multi-age conversation, it'd be good to have a little bit of a history lesson. Because we had multi-age classrooms, and we went away from multi-age.
we did. Yep.
When we were doing Common Core, all the Common Core conversation. So it'd be good to talk about where we were.
Totally appreciate that.
So-
I mean,
That would
for-
be hugely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is it was at least a $5 million investment we made to go away from it. And so I appreciate that there are good reasons why. I also think at this point, there's a fair question to be asked as to whether we would prefer to have very few multi-age classrooms versus several $1 million to do other things.
I think those are big strategy questions that might be great to explore early on
I just
for
don't want them to get
next
lost.
budget.
And I'd
Got
like
it.
to
I
know,
hear you.
How staff feels about multi-age
Yeah, I think-
classrooms. Whether or not they feel that's more
Totally.
challenge teaching multi-age versus single-age classrooms.
Yeah,
So I'd
and
like to have that input too. when we have the
I think the most important thing, and I know we're not going to have this discussion right now. I know, Mary, I can feel you.
Yeah. Right. It's
But
not going to affect
It's
this
not going to
budget.
affect this budget, but I do want to remind everyone that as we're rewriting the strategic framework, we've talked a lot about school-based decisions for instructional design, empowering schools to do what's right for them. So I think these are also choices that either limit school-based decision-making, right, or expand it. And so there's something to be talked about there, too.
Mike, one other context for the budget that I don't think you had mentioned when we went through it, and I'd like to get to before the priority actions, was with regards to, you had said that additional spending that was allowable from the referendum was an important part of that $8 million that we have available.
Right.
There's board members who weren't on the board and weren't involved when we went to the voters for that referendum. And I wondered if you can provide that context of what we told the voters to get that additional money.
Right. So that was November of 16. It was a referendum to exceed the state revenue limits and revenue limits for K-12. And it was a move that was done in anticipation of continuing underfunding of K-12 by the state. And we were particularly concerned that if the last year, this year, and the next 2 years continued this pattern of underfunding,
Well,
that we were going to be in a tough
maybe you
spot.
could,
And-
like underfunding, meaning we weren't going to get the $200. We wouldn't.
Right.
We were planning on getting no
Right.
increase.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so then, the funding for last year and for this, for current year and next year is $200 and $204 per pupil. Frankly, better than we had anticipated. Of course, it's all relative. And the authority that we asked for from the community was $5 million of additional levy authority last year and this year, and then $8 million next year and the following year. And it was really intended, at least in my view, to prevent the major disruptions to the school district that we had been experiencing. We had 2 years in a row with more than 60 layoffs. And it came out of that sense of wanting to protect the district, minimize distractions, keep the staff and students focused on learning. That was really the heart of it. And so that's how we,
yeah,
that's
so
how-
I
that's how we
think
talked
it is
about it.
important when we talk about going above even a 4.5% tax increase, that this is, that authority was given, because to TJ's point, with people getting 12%, 15% bills, tax bills that are going to say that's what their taxes are going up. I think we have to be held accountable when we went to the referendum for what we said in the referendum. And I think I was out there pushing for it. It was to avoid cuts. Okay.
That's right.
Back to the priority
So-
actions? Yeah.
Just 2 quick points. Number one is that just rerunning Mike's figures, that comes to, if we don't do the targeted compensation, it comes to 2.26 million as opposed to, and if we do it, if we do the targeted compensation for $1 million, then we actually don't even have levy authority, because that brings us to 3.26 million. To Mary's point, I think that we have to set our priorities.
Yeah.
And if cost of living, a COLA raises or something close to it is a priority, then we have to find other places to reallocate from. And I don't think there's, and we have to be responsible with our using our tax authority. So that combination, and be the reallocations, be things like Kate has talked about with some savings here. I just think that we have to find that balance. So. Now we can move to priority action.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Tell just from the quality of the questions that you guys have a pretty firm grasp of the major pieces that are on this chessboard. So we're going to move on then and take a little time to focus on the priority actions. And I will turn it over to Lisa to lead that discussion.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Before we start our discussion about priority actions, I just wanted to start off and be really clear about our intent and approach to the priority actions this year, and just call attention to the fact that we have a small number of them. So we're going to talk just about 4 tonight. We think that they are the priority actions that will have high impact moving forward. We see them as being targeted to our students of color and where there's an existing unmet need in the system. We have tried to be really thoughtful and align them to the emerging priority areas in the strategic framework that Jen mentioned a little bit earlier, and to areas where children and families need us the most. So you'll be hearing about a package of 4 priority actions tonight. Some of the priority actions include FTE and staffing, and we have been really pressure testing those FTE areas and the roles and responsibilities moving forward to make sure that those are the right things that we want to be doing and that we have the right people in the right seats moving forward. So before I start, I just want to give you a high-level summary of the 4 priority actions, and then I'm going to ask some of our folks to come up and provide more detail in each of those areas. So the first priority action that you see is the Early College STEM Academy, which is aligned to Priority Area 3 in the framework, multiple viable options to post-secondary. And just in summary around this, this is a focused action for students of color and females who experience barriers to accelerated coursework, particularly in the area of STEM-related fields. So Cindy will be coming up shortly to talk a little bit about that. We also see that as an important strategy aligned to our OCR resolution, and it reflects a partnership that we have with Madison College. Nichelle will join us for the following 2 priority actions. Just a quick preview around community schools and youth and family engagement, aligned to our second priority in the framework, which is building positive and trusting relationships. So the community schools, just a reminder, this is our phased approach to supporting schools where families have limited access and are situated in such a way where there are actually barriers to them receiving services and supports. And Nichelle will be talking a little bit about the different components of that, and want to acknowledge that you actually have graciously early approved our coordinators for those community schools. And then our youth and family engagement strategy that Nicole will talk about, that Nichelle will talk about, sorry, is around middle schools, knowing that our adolescents and middle schools are experiencing some struggles around behavior and academics. And we know that there is a need there to wrap around families to support the unique needs of adolescents. We know there's a really important transition to middle school, a really important transition out of middle school into high school, and really finding ways to ensure that families have options and opportunities going in and going into middle school and going into high school. So just a focused area of engagement work moving forward. And then finally, Alex will join us around the youth re-engagement priority action, which is also aligned to priority area number 3, viable options to post-secondary. And as a team, we found a way to repurpose and rethink about allocations to fund 3 team members on this team. So this priority action is about a leader who will establish the vision and has the accountability and the responsibility for bringing that team together to support our students who need us the most at this level. And you know, I was talking with Nichelle earlier, and we talked about that idea of creating a district of belonging for these students and families. So Alex is going to talk a little bit about that and about how this priority action, which is the smallest of the 4, is important for these youth and families that we have in our district. So I'm going to pause there And I'm going to invite Cindy to come up and talk about Early College STEM Academy.
Hi, everyone. So I think before, I just want to make sure, we're expecting about 2 minutes, and then it's going to be board questions. So,
Just thinking about 10 minutes per the board.
yeah.
Okay, that's what I was curious. But you beat me to it. So.
So I'll try and go quicker than 2 minutes. This is familiar, I think, to everyone. We've been talking about Early College STEM Academy for a few months now, but a reminder that 25 of our students from Easton La Follette next year will be in our first phase of a great opportunity to have access to college early while they're in high school. And we had a targeted focus of our students of color and females, both underrepresented groups in the STEM fields. These students will be taking not only STEM-related coursework that is earning college credit, but will also be earning their high school graduation requirements at the same time, with students having the ability to graduate high school with an associate's degree in the sciences that transfers to a UW, let's say, as a junior over at UW. So they are able to leave high school with up to 60 credits that transfer to a college or university. This is part of a strategy that is also focusing on our students of color, accelerating their coursework as well as accessing advanced coursework. And the last thing I will say is that this is the phase one, and our goal is to have our students attend the new South Campus that is being built, and having up to 200 of our students across all 6 of our high schools in the future.
Did you finish?
I'm done. Yep.
Okay, great. Nikki?
Just one quick question. You said 60 credits transferable to the UW. Does that mean any university or just the Wisconsin system?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Madison College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison have a kind of transferable partnership. Most of the credits will transfer. We have outlined every single credit and every single university of where it will go. Yes. Good question.
Teacher?
Can you remind us of what the selection criteria will be?
Yeah, sure. So the selection criteria, excuse me?
And has it started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we had 65 applicants that applied. If you remember, our application process started back in November, and then we went through. So there were 2 phases to it. Students had to complete an application, and then the second phase was an interview. The criteria that we focused on was students had to have a 2.25 GPA, and they had to have at least a 90% attendance rate, and they had to be on track with their coursework for their first year of high school, so their 9th grade year. And then the second round, we had another set of criteria through a rubric that we used for their interview to make the decision. And out of the 65, we identified 25, and over 80% of those students met one or more of our criteria around a student of color, a female, first-generation college going, low SES.
In light of that selection criteria, the metrics to determine success seems pretty weak. 100% of graduate would graduate from high school, and I really think that if we're going to take students who are already on track to graduate by every measure we have, then to say we're a success because they graduated is not telling us a whole lot about this program being a success. So I think that, you know, some of the additional monitoring metrics could be put into the metrics to determine success.
You're referring to the MOA?
What's that? I don't know. This is from the briefing we have here.
Oh, sure, sure.
And one other question is, and I brought this up when this originally came before us, is that, you know, every source I look at shows full-time student tuition at MATC plus books at about $5,700 a year, and we're paying $7,000. Why? And I brought this up before, and I was supposed to get an answer.
You haven't got an answer to that, TJ? Oh, that's interesting. Mike or Cindy, do you feel prepared to answer the $7,000 question? I know that we have a commitment to work with Madison College after we get out of this first phase to figure out the most cost-effective model as possible, but I don't know if you guys have anything to add about the $7,000.
We addressed what I thought was a related question several months ago, which was, if you happen to be a full-time student at Madison College, you pay a certain amount of tuition, and why would we be paying more than that? Well, as you know, the cost that Madison College charges their students does not represent their full cost. They have a tax levy just like we do. They cannot levy for these kids. They're on our account. So, so that's a factor. They're trying to capture their actual cost, not their tuition cost, as best they can. That this was, we've got the financial models to show this is the labor inputs and the class sizes and the additional supports and the transportation and the meals and so on. And that number came out to, I want to say, $69.92 or something.
We'll follow up with.
Now so I thought, we tested that number. I felt reasonably okay with that. I will add, however, that that's for 25 students. And if this program grows to 200 students, we will be looking for some economies of scale associated with cost per student. I think it will be important to the long-term viability of this program.
And ultimately, as a reminder to the board, as this transitions into an intensive, the highest level.
Yep, high intensity.
High intensity, thank you. Partnership, the MOA will come to the board for approval.
And if you've shared that previously, my apologies. If you haven't, if you could share that analysis, that would be appreciated.
Yep, we'll do. All right.
Okay,
Thank you,
well then
Cindy.
we're on to the next one.
Appreciate it,
All right.
Cindy.
That was less than 10 minutes.
All right. Nichelle, come on up.
Hi, Michelle.
Cindy, you want this? Okay. All right, for community schools, good to see you. First, I want to just thank you for the early approval on the 2 resource coordinator positions that you approved in March. Much appreciated. Just wanted to give you a quick update that we're in our current selection process for the next 2 schools, and our timeline is that we're completing application reviews, interview panels, and should be moving forward with recommendations by the end of this month. So we'll have something good to share with you in May. So this funding request for community schools is really in capturing 3 components, 2 that are based on replication of the model that we did with Leopold and Mendota, and wanting to put that in place for the next 2 schools, and then 1 new ask. The family and schools together, which is the FAST component, is an evidence-based family engagement curriculum and program. It's been around for over 20 years, nationally and internationally known, and has been evaluated. And what we've learned through our implementation in this first couple of years is that we really want the parent liaison to have some structured program that they can do that is group-based with families. Most of our parent liaisons are really good on individual family engagement connections, but don't often have the skill set or the support and training to do group-based work. And we're really impressed with the outcomes that FAST has had over the years. So we'd like to bring FAST in that will provide that training, support, just the structure for them to really bring families in and run cycles throughout the 18-19 school year. You can also see parent liaisons are part of this request. As a reminder, Leopold and Mendota, when we designated them community schools, had parent liaisons, and then we added the resource coordinator. And so we see that parent liaison position as a critical complementary component to really doing the family engagement work alongside a community school resource coordinator, which is why you see the ask here. And then lastly, that programming cost and supplies at a total of $35,000 replicates the initial funding that we also gave to Leopold and Mendota. Most of that $17,000 was used in contracted services to really help them bring in the initial programs and services that were aligned to their needs assessment and their focus areas at the school. We think that funding is essential for the community schools to really get some traction. Otherwise, you're asking resource coordinators, principals to start grant writing, doing lots of other fund development work, instead of being able to really leverage the resources and new opportunities.
Nikki?
I think it's a great idea. I think you've done great work. I just have one question. Why are we using two NUPs instead of regular instead of FTEs?
Okay, so you're going back to the community school resource coordinators? Okay, so I think I did send an update, but just as a reminder, the reason why the community school resource coordinators are categorized as a non-union professional is that those positions are working lots of evenings, working weekends. They're kind of in a salaried professional role. And because the position requires a lot of that startup work, it's better captured as a non-union professional, just because you're not then dealing with overtime, flex time, folks that are then trying to work within a 40-hour week per se. We really needed these folks to be able to work year-round, evening, weekend, kind of whatever it takes to get the community school model off the ground and into maturity.
Got it.
Kate?
James was next, right?
James?
In terms of proposed additional funding, the evidence-based model, FAST, is it possible we can see some of that evidence? You mentioned the FAST evidence over the last number of years. Is it possible we can see some of that to help us make our decision about the proposed additional funding by demographics? I'd like to know who they're serving.
Sure. Yeah, we've, FAST is Madison-based. So we actually have, I think Lisa is a former principal, used to run FAST.
Carl, that's the first time I've heard of it.
Yeah, and I certainly have outcomes and evaluation data.
What the evidence looks like. I have in my mind what the evidence, well, I'll leave it at that. Can I see?
We can do it for you, James.
Yeah, absolutely.
You bet.
So, two questions. One, can you just remind us how much of this is grant funded and sort of we're locked into there's no choices to be made versus there are choices to be made?
Yeah. So on the left side of the chart, the community school resource coordinators.
That's what's coming out of the grant and everything else is coming out.
So there's that's a 50% was coming from the grant, not reflected in the 95,000, and the 95,000 was kind of the district.
This is all incremental.
The district's grant. So on the right side of the chart is, at this point, what we're asking is district investment.
It's all incremental on top of the grant. Okay. And then I know, so we lost our liaison at Leopold, who was amazing, and one of the reasons was just workload.
Yeah.
These look like they're funded to the same. We're not adding anything on top of what was there, or it's not a clear question. Just, are we adding time or FTEs to make those roles more manageable, or keeping them?
Not at this point.
Okay.
So, I thank you for bringing that up. I want you to know that, I definitely did an exit interview with our resource coordinator that left Leopold. We certainly had a change at Mendota after the first year. So we've used some of that exit interview information to really go back through the job description that we had envisioned a couple of years ago, and have now added some components that we think more accurately reflect kind of the way that their time is spent. Okay. And furthermore, Erin Peterson, who's our community school manager, and myself have also talked with Principal Sloan and Principal Stanford about what we need to do to make these positions kind of more sustainable in the future. How might we kind of provide them a little bit more cover, so to speak, in terms of some of that coordination and community-based work that they need to do, that sometimes feels hard to pull off in a regular school day. So we've been talking about ways to kind of realign the position.
Teacher?
The programming cost and supplies with the existing community schools, was that a one-time or is that an ongoing cost?
So right now, it's been reoccurring. So we made the initial investment the first year of the designation. We haven't pulled that out. But I think as the schools become, I would say, as we become better at really looking at how they're aligning all of the resources available, I think we'll look at whether or not we can then replace or reduce some of that initial startup money as with new grant dollars or other things, but not in the first couple of years. We think it's been pretty essential for them to be able to actually bring in new programs and services.
I want to thank James for asking for more information on FAST. I have a general kind of positive feeling towards them, but I haven't looked at anything in years, so thanks for that, for reminding.
Yeah.
I would have just gone with it. I will say that with this, and in the context of all the priority actions, and not this one in particular, that with compensation still up in the air, I'm having real trouble adding positions, and particularly non-classroom positions. And just as a general thing, that not critiquing this one in particular, but it comes up here, and also I guess the question is that if one of the new schools picked already had a parent liaison, would that be funded and then free up money for that school? I mean, how does that work? That's kind of a question.
It's a great question. It's the same thing I've been.
And as Leopold and Mendota start going, hey, we're paying that out of our regular budget. Give us some money now.
No, well, the parent liaisons that Leopold and Mendota have, just for clarification, are funded out of the Family, Youth, and Community Engagement Department.
Okay.
And of the 3 school applications that we have in hand and that are in review right now, neither of those have a parent liaison. But it's a great question in terms of long-term.
And I guess if the middle school's in there, we've got the middle school proposal coming up, and then those, we'll get to that.
Yep.
Can I just make a comment? I mean, I'm sort of struggling as well, particularly in the context of Mary's comments, that the referendum was kind of intended to prevent us from making cuts, right? And we're, there's a lot of investments here, and our district needs investment, there's no question. But I'm similarly having trouble kind of talking about where to invest when we haven't solidified the foundation. So we can come back to that at the end, but I just...
Right, and we're not asking you guys to vote tonight.
No,
All
I
these
understand.
pieces have to play out. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And I appreciate that we'll come back to the question of base wage, and that, you know, I mean, I think steps and lanes are about 2%-ish too, right? And so we're talking about, I'd like to see the whole picture there before we do that. It's just, it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit.
You have to see how every element comes together.
Yes, I just want to move on through their priority actions before we go through. So any other questions on, for Nichelle on community schools? Okay.
All right, so the next request in front of you is really focused on our middle schools. It is adding new positions, so I want to just acknowledge the point that I just heard. But we're making this ask because I feel like what we've heard loud and clear through many of the strategic framework listening sessions is that our students and families, particularly of color, desperately want to feel like they belong, want to feel like they have really authentic, culturally responsive folks that they can be connected to. And we also know that in middle school, just the changes with our adolescent learners as well as family engagement looks dramatically and is dramatically different at the middle school years. We see these positions as being kind of the bridge folks for students of color and their families, really promoting trusting relationships. And we focused on these 3 schools, Toki, Sherman, and Jefferson, for several reasons. We looked at proficiency rate data for our African American students, which has been low and stagnant. And we really feel like those students would benefit from having someone who also is providing academic support and coordination for them, making the connection between their classroom teachers and home stronger. We've looked at attendance data at these 3 schools. It certainly begs for attention. And we've heard from student panels at each of these schools about their desire to have a stronger sense of belonging and what we think would help foster that. You'll also notice that 2 of the schools are in the memorial attendance area. We see this as a positive, intentional strategy to build more social capital for families in that feeder pattern and a stronger trajectory for our African American students. So that is the ask in front of you.
Thank you.
I understand the logic behind it, and again, this is in the context of the larger thing. One thing is that I think that I'd like to see, if this goes forward, I'd like to see the metrics to determine align better with what you just described. Number of volunteer hours is, and I want to also thank you for talking about attendance. When we come to the end and when we have an opportunity to talk about things that I think are missing from priority actions, attendance is some of the, I think that both of your proposals speak indirectly to attendance, but I think that dealing more directly with attendance is something that we should be doing with a priority action. So, you know, if revising the metrics to include some academic achievement, include attendance, include not only climate survey data with if this is family engagement, not only how they're answering, but also how many are answering. I mean, you get some of our schools where we have 100, well, the strategic framework update last year highlighted 100% of African American parents answered positively about feeling welcome. There were 10 out of a school that has over 100 African American parents. So I think the number answering is important. James always brings that up on how many on our survey data. And then, so that's kind of a, you know, just if this goes forward, I would really like to see that a lot stronger. The other piece is that, and we had a little piece of this conversation last time this was up there, is questions of equity and interaction with middle schools that already have family liaisons. And I understand this is not a family liaison position, but if I was a family liaison at a middle school already and saw this job description and said, I've been doing that, and I'm getting paid $50,000 and this person's getting paid $70,000, I would not be happy. And so I think that as this goes forward, those issues have to be front and center and transparent.
Yep.
And I think what we have family liaisons at 2 or 3 middle schools right now.
Yeah.
Senate.
I know 2 for sure.
2 I can think of, and I always just say 3 just in case I'm forgetting one.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that that's got to be front and center. I mean, I think that, you know, when we talk about morale, we talk about valued employees and things like that, that we don't. You know, I would perceive that as being undercut if I was in that position. So I think that's, and if there's a cost associated with that, then that should be on the table.
Thank you, TJ.
Great.
Okay, then on to youth engagement.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. So it's
Okay. Alex?
Yeah. Good evening. So just in thinking back to February 2015 when we presented to the board about alternatives, thankfully the board acknowledged the good work that's been taking place with providing better and high quality options, alternative options to pathways, alternative pathways to graduation. And at the same time, the board has also been pushing us pretty consistently about not just creating more seats, but creating better options for students. But that's been difficult to do, primarily because we've not necessarily had the infrastructure to do it or do it well. And we think this particular team will provide the necessary infrastructure that both targets and accelerates the performance of Opportunity Youth, who are in large numbers students of color. We're happy that we're able to repurpose internal resources to round out their team to ensure that they have the tools necessary to meet the goals that have been outlined in the briefing for you, which I won't go through. But I do want to just call attention to this idea that we will be ensuring more students will be able to meet their academic and personal goals through concentrated case management, which I would say is not necessarily a strength of ours across our schools, with a real focus on effective transitions and integrated supports. To design and launch, monitor and evaluate, which I think is a key component of this idea of creating unique spaces for students, that I think the leader will play a critical role in doing, to ensure that we're meeting a wide variety of students, to increase attendance rates, to increase credit attainment, to ensure that we're reducing referral rates and suspension rates, that creates options that are both relevant, rigorous, and not just create a sense of belonging, but actually empower students and their families, which I think is the key difference. And lastly, to kind of coordinate and integrate the work of community-based partnerships right now, that's already serving opportunity youth, but it's not done in a highly integrated fashion, to maximize our collective efforts, to have a faster and kind of greater impact, I think particularly for those students who have dropped out of our system that need to be re-engaged. And lastly, to achieve this, the team actually needs a highly skilled leader, and one who would lead this team within the community as a community-based organization that is not tethered to some of the central office bureaucracies, where this leader would have both the credibility and the authority to make key decisions that oftentimes to navigate some of those barriers that get in the way of serving students that need nimble supports and integrated services. I think the leader of this team will have clear goals, accountability, and influence to build the systems and align the expertise of the team members, the families, and the community-based partnerships to provide the necessary targeted supports for the kids who have historically been marginalized in our district, that we believe is a strategy that will reverse that.
Nikki?
A couple questions.
Sure.
Under the credit attainment, GPA, attendance, and behavior incidents that they will focus on in the proposal, aren't we doing that already with Avid Tops? Aren't we recreating a lot of these programs? We have organizations that do this work. I'm not sure I quite understand the need, but maybe someone could fill me in.
Yeah, so I would say, Nikki, that all of our school improvement efforts at the secondary level are all designed to improve those metrics. Avid Tops actually meets a specific need of a specific group of students, but I wouldn't necessarily put those kids in the category of opportunity youth. So going back to the report that Ricardo put together a few months ago, I mean, we're talking about students who are significantly off track, who are justice involved, and who have already dropped out. So these are very different group of students who we've not necessarily met their needs to ensure that they're on track for graduation or post-secondary success.
Nikki, did you have another question?
Yeah, I have one. It's a three-part question, fair warning. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me get my pen out.
It's who I am. The issue, I know it sounds good, but one, it says it's being funded by IDEA, correct?
A portion.
A portion.
A portion is?
Correct.
Because I keep getting these letters from a lot of the cross-categorical teachers. I've gotten 3 anonymous letters that are saying the IEPs aren't even being followed and the team meetings haven't even been held. So, and the micro school La Follette. So how can we ensure that those happen? Because I'm getting worried. I mean, this is something I don't know enough on. I don't want to destroy anything, but I'd love the information.
The micro school is not what we're discussing here. We're happy to follow up with
Yeah,
information.
please
I know
do.
you got a question about
And we are gonna be
IEPs and
following up.
micro
Yeah,
school, so
that would be wonderful.
You absolutely got it, Nikki.
And
Yeah.
the other question that I have is, how do we get this aligned with our other programs? Like our other services, we have a lot for at-risk. How do we get them to work seamlessly? How do we do that?
That is the goal.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's actually part of the challenge, that we have a number of good things happening in pockets across the city, but nothing I'm saying nothing.
But
too much of it is not
yeah.
significantly aligned.
Right.
And the coordination factor is real. I was talking to Jen earlier today when we thought about where was this happening years ago. Innovative Alternative Education kind of was that hub. That literally just managed programs. It didn't necessarily define quality. It didn't manage quality. It actually didn't deepen the roles of community-based organizations that were already in that space. This is designed to do that and to fill those gaps.
Got it. That provides a lot more clarification than I had.
Yeah, and remember, IAE, Innovative and Alternative Education, no longer exists. It's capital High. And Karen Stocks Glover is now a principal of a school,
not a director.
right? And to expect that she's being the principal of a school and managing and coordinating all these additional programs is, well, it's not possible, which is another reason why it isn't happening.
The gap that we found.
Yeah. Dean?
Yeah. This issue particularly, I approach it, frankly, with a hair on fire.
Yeah.
Understanding. This is way beyond serious here. We better do this, and we better engage it properly, or we will not succeed, and we have not been succeeding at all. The three arrows, the second two are important to me, because just as you suggested earlier, we have not partnered enough with community-based programs that are already doing a lot of this work with staff of color. One of the checklists is have staff there that kids can relate to. So by really increasing our relationships in these last two bullets with the community-based organizations that are there and that we can partner with is imperative. It will not succeed if we don't do that at a much, much higher level than what we're doing now. And I think we've had the benefit of Ricardo spending a lot of time all year on this. And we've got a pilot up and running, only a week into it, or 2 weeks, is it? With probably some things not quite there yet. So if the IEPs weren't done, they better catch up and get that done. And make sure that everything each student over there has been identified as a need gets covered, so we can get an accurate read on it. And then duplicate it as we expand these programs. It'll be way worth it. But I'm telling you right now, we need to expand our real connections with community-based organizations that exist and bring them in as in the support levels and in wide ranges and in ways that we're not even doing now, or not maybe even envisioning right now. But as I said, for me, this is a hair on fire issue. It rises to that level of importance, and there are people in the community that are coming at it from the same perspective, and we better address this.
James?
Yeah, over the years on the board, many board members, there's been a lot of really budget discussions. There's been a lot of pull and pushing around adding administrators. And as we sit here and try to figure out how to increase our frontline employee salaries, which seems to be huge interest with the board, and it's been an interest with the board for many years. And when you see the administrative positions being added, and you look at the cost of those positions, this position is $120,000. And look, I by no means, it's great that we pay our administrators a good salary so that they don't have to suffer like our teachers suffer with paying mortgages and things of that nature. But it's troubling. I've sat around and thought about it. It's just troubling that we struggle so much to raise our frontline employees' pay, teachers, and those that work directly with our students. And when we constantly adding a lot of administrative positions. Now, I don't know how this is going to play out in my mind as we reach our final decision, but I just want to say that it's sort of troubling for me that when I look at these dollar amounts, and I'm a civil servant, so I can readily compare what that dollar amount means in terms of what civil servants make, and whether it's on federal level, state level, what have you, and what $120,000, who is a $120,000 civil servant? I can readily relate to that, and so I certainly don't disparage. It's great that we can pay our administrators well, and that we do, but it's just troubling to me that we, as we add these positions, and they're high-paid positions, that we struggle so much to pay our teachers and other staff, and we need to figure out some way to get some kind of balance here, because these are added fixed costs, and these are fixed costs, and so we can't use the dollars anywhere else. So I don't know what that's going to mean in my 90 days of thinking and my vote, but you know, we witness marches around the country. Teachers are suffering everywhere, including here in Wisconsin especially, and so we have to figure out some kind of solution here to make it our frontline employees, their economic situations better, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but it's a little troubling for me.
Alex, did you have a comment? And I think we do need clarification, just so that everyone is clear. What is the actual salary, and what percentage are the benefits built in on this? I think this is, I think we have to be.
Well, it's stated here that it's 120 is, I mean, it's
No,
clear that
that's
it's not all
benefits.
salary.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
benefits, everything. It's
But it's
fringe
still
benefits.
the total cost for that employee.
It's like 90/30.
Yeah, I mean, the point stands, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's,
I mean, and Mike can answer that question better than I can, but it's a vacancy rate that we put as an estimation
So, yeah,
for that
it's
particular
like a
position.
placeholder,
But it's
yeah.
not to say that that individual is going to be paid $120,000.
Right. You pay them
The benefits are.
depending on who apply, what their experience is. Yeah, it's just kind of a average placeholder number. So, what do you
So my
think,
point was-
70?
Yeah, I mean,
I want to comment on the actual point.
Okay, I'd like to,
I
let's
don't want
keep,
you to
we've
take
spent
that.
more than 10 minutes on this, so, and not everyone had been able to speak,
Oh.
so let's wrap.
Yeah, if there are more questions,
Who
I can do
else,
that.
has anyone, TJ?
First, on the question of salaries versus benefits, I misspoke before when I was talking about the parent liaisons. Parent liaisons are paid approximately $25,000 to $30,000 a year, with $25,000 to $30,000 a year worth of benefits. The proposed middle school ones are would be approximately a $50,000 salary with about $30,000 worth of benefits, and I misspoke on that before. So just to clarify that. On the issue of funding, next time we see this, I'd like to see more detail about where the 3 positions are being repurposed from. If we have 3 positions that we don't need right now, I'd like to know what those are. Just that if we've been, if we funded them in the last budget, we apparently thought we needed them last year, and apparently we don't need them anymore. Secondly, some more detail around the title funding and how is that district level title funding would be assigned school funding, those kind of pieces. I'm working from the briefing sheet, and one of the things I've said all along about this is that I'm not comfortable with the lack of definition and focus, and there's 3 bullet points towards the second setup from the one-page briefing. And in order of what I am most comfortable with and most strongly believe is the needs of the district, I think coordinating information services, resources, and strategy with MMSD and across community-based organizations, much like Dean described, is probably what as a focus for an office, maybe not 4 people doing that, but kind of a foundation central with a broader charge. Number 2 would be deliver concentrated emotional and academic supports. I think we have a definite need for that. And then, but in partnerships with student community groups, design and launch and sustain student-centered alternative schooling options. That I'm not so comfortable with. And mostly because those schools have to be staffed. Those schools have to have spaces. Those schools have new costs associated with them. If we take the La Follette Micro School project, That's about $360,000 annually for a very, very small project. And so, you know, if this gets shifted a little bit, that would reflect my priorities. And finally, like a broken record, the metrics on these. Student-generated goals and personal goals and staff-generated goals that we don't have in front of us now. I understand how you'd want to work with those internally, but in terms of, you know, just kind of what's the public face of this, they don't hold a lot of weight. I think that when we're talking about students in the re-engagement strategies, that the traditional measures of GPA, attendance, and graduation are not really good metrics. If a kid comes to us and we put him on the right track and we've done some real good work and the kid's 20 and he's done with us at 21 and he's not graduated, in some ways we want to get credit for him having done that. We want to credit the program. We want to say we did good work here, even though the kid didn't graduate. I talked a little with Ricardo about this. One of the things that people are doing with re-engagement strategies and re-engagement programs is kind of using some combination, in addition to, you know, graduate's part of it, these are all part of it, is how many students how many potential students they've contacted, how many have they met with beyond contacting, how many have enrolled in something, and then different versions of what they call a stick rate. 6 weeks in, are they still attending classes? Are they 8 weeks in, 12 weeks in, 14? And, you know, are they moving towards credit? And I would really like to see some appropriate and strong measures so we know if we're doing well. And we've agreed in advance what doing well looks like. So, yeah. And I mean, I think on 3 out of 4 of these, I'm talking about the metrics. If we're going to do this, let's in advance agree on what success looks like. Do you want to comment or respond?
If I could, just 2 quick points. So to James, I really appreciate those sentiments. The only thing I would, because we did debate this idea of that specific role, we thought it was really, really important that person be able to evaluate not just the programs, but also the people, given that they would actually be positioned in the community and be able to make key decisions, which as a teacher or a staff member or coordinator, that's less likely. So just to provide maybe a little context for the why the administrator,
about the program.
not the
Yeah, I
role.
know.
Okay, just about the number.
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
That was mine.
Okay.
So, Alex, I had a question with regards to the 3 other positions. Are people in those positions and they're being reassigned?
No.
Well, then I actually have the same question TJ has about,
A little more detail.
right, because if we don't need those, if we didn't fill those positions, those to me are 3 positions that should be up for discussion that we eliminate.
It's a 4-position.
Yeah, it's a 4, right.
And it's fine.
As we look at.
It's a 4-position proposal.
I would have to agree with TJ and Mary. I'd love the information on that. Thank you.
Okay, so then we are going to wrap it up with TID 25.
Actually, can I make a couple of comments
Sure.
before we move to TID 25? Just on the whole package.
Yeah, I mean, I have some
priority
comments on the whole
actions.
package too, but I think, did you want, I just saw discussion after TID, so I was holding all my stuff. So what do you want us to-
Well, I think one thing is we go, because we stopped at every point, and we had discussion on every point, and we're not voting on anything, and we're not, so
There's 2
I'd
things.
like to have the discussion that we have it fairly targeted, absolutely discussion, but I also think, I don't want to just open up the whole budget
There's 2
tonight
things not
and
on the
do that.
list that we've raised before that I
Yeah.
would like to get
Yeah, go
back on
ahead.
the
Go for
list. So there's 2 things from a priority action perspective that we've talked about before that haven't made it onto the list, and so one is full day 4K. Again, we talked about this in January. My understanding of this process was that we raised our things early and then we would talk about them before we had the opportunity to vote. It feels a little late at this point to do that, but I would like to have a discussion about what a pilot for full day 4K would cost. And then the second is just around behavior and behavioral health and mental health in our schools.
Yeah.
I mean, from a priority perspective and investment in this moment in time, I have to say that just blank sheet of paper, not looking at any of this, taking care of our frontline employees, behavior and mental health in our schools are probably number 1 and 2. And so, and full day 4K for me would come before almost everything here. So, let me finish. So I would love to be able to have a dialogue about that with some facts before we vote on this. Whenever that
Yeah,
moment
which is June. Yeah, the board votes on the budget in June as an entirety.
Preliminary budget.
Thank you. The preliminary budget, thank you, James, in June. There'll be lots of opportunity for board amendments, additions, changes.
But we're not going to make an amendment for 4K, right? Like, that's a program that we need to have.
Let me finish, too. Lisa's going to talk about 4K momentarily, because we have looked at that and did some thinking about what's feasible. And in terms of mental health, what we talked about at the last meeting is we're doubling the number of schools that have fully integrated behavioral health in schools this
Elementary,
upcoming
right?
year. No, it's elementary and middle. It's a combination, which is significant, doubling. And if through this process the board wants to learn about what would it take to accelerate that process even faster, let's have that conversation, right, through April, May, and June. So we'll be prepared to do just that.
Yeah, I would just
but we'll
like
talk
to
about
be able
4K
to
in a
have a
second.
conversation with this group in a work group setting before we
Yeah.
vote on that stuff.
Yeah, you'll have work group in May, work group in June, before you vote on the preliminary budget. Yeah,
The preliminary budget vote's in June.
correct. End of June.
Okay, that was the timing. I wasn't
Yeah,
trying
we
to cut
haven't even
anyone off.
given you the budget book yet. Yeah.
Oh, good. Then I didn't misplace it. I just wanted to make sure.
That's right.
Knowing me, it's possible.
I just want to very quickly second Kate's desire to talk about those issues, and especially the mental health issue.
Yeah.
And like I said, in the context of talking to Michelle, also to add that attendance and being more proactive around attendance issues. When I look at our percentages, particularly of students in poverty and students of color with who are habitually tardy or just at below 80% or 83% inconsistently, and we've targeted 9th grade attendance a bit, and you know what? It hasn't gotten much better among targeted students.
Yeah.
And in some schools it's gotten worse, and I really think that in some ways that, you know, we're cleaning up the mess with things like opportunity students, and some of that mess is created by lack of it just not being there. So that's my 2 cents there. And I agree that compensation, we need to get that.
So I think Kate brings up a really good point. Are there other things that are not in the budget, that were not on this? I think now's a good time to raise them so that the staff are able, if there's real interest and real support, to bring back more information on those. Nikki?
I'd like more info on the restorative justice initiatives. I think that goes along with the mental health. I think that more than any time would be necessary, especially with like info on bridges, because I think that program with providing some mental health services might be incredibly helpful if we could expand that to more schools, because right now we have kids who can't afford a doctor. And this is actually helping, and I don't think we've done enough to utilize it.
Nikki mentioned before, but the $32,000 custodial, or 36 was my memory, and so just more information on that and how that breaks out.
Yep.
James?
Could you just mention for a minute or so what the budget impact may be from the allocation model? I mean, when is that work going to be done, and what will be the there may be some shifting or some priority?
Yeah.
There could be some possible outcomes.
You talk about the special ed?
Yes.
It covers BEP, especially in some areas, so.
It does. Do you want to speak to that, Lise?
Sure. Actually, we have had a couple sessions with the team already by phone and once in person, and their timeline for the work and recommendations extend to, I want to say, about July. So any impact, James, for next year is probably not likely in terms of current staffing plan, but the year after that would be when we would be implementing a new process. So the 1920 school year would be when the recommendations would actually take effect, rather than 18-19, because we got a little bit of a late start. We just started working with them. They're gathering the data. They're talking to folks, principals and other stakeholder groups, and will come back to us with...
a year to implement those findings?
To impact the staffing plan that's currently, the staffing plan that was developed, the workbooks that were put in place, those are out, those are, the hiring's happening, the surplus process has happened. So to actually implement a different way of allocating that bucket of resources in a new staffing plan would likely mean the 1920 school year.
That's correct. Yep. So yeah, so next
Last
budget
one.
round.
Last one.
We got late start.
We're hearing 2 schools are using Title I money to add administrators, and would like to hear more about both the reasons and the analysis. And this is something new. To my knowledge, it's new in our district that Title I is being used for administrative positions, and maybe there are precedents that I don't know about, but if any kind of history piece would be going to, James talking about adding administrators. So, and is 2 correct?
Yeah, I just read that in the draft budget book, because I think it's a couple. I think
Yeah,
that's
it's a
right,
couple.
TJ.
I think it's and it is allowable on Title I. We just found that out this year.
But we've just never done it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
This may sound pie in the sky, but I got this from the Operation Fresh Start forum, and the effects of not having driver's ed in school, and how many parents cannot afford to have the kids take driver's ed, and how much would that cost to restore it. I mean, it may not be feasible, but I think we should at least find out, because the majority of people I've talked to say, I just can't afford private driving lessons. I just can't.
We do have a fine partnership with the county on that.
Do we?
Yes, we do. We do, a fine partnership.
Thank you. I didn't have info on that.
Okay, Laura.
So I think just going back to something that was missing here, but is definitely a priority for me, and I think some of you have mentioned it before, is advanced learning, more investments into that. I think last time when it was the main discussion, we talked about how if we wanted to create like a systematic program of instruction, that would require a lot more than what we had dedicated for it. So just, if it's not in this budget, then thinking about how we would build that into being a priority, even if it's not a specific priority area here.
Okay, that wraps up that part of the budget discussion, and we're going to the proposed. Yep.
Okay, Mike, you're going to take the lead on to 25?
Yeah, Bart, we're going to do kid 25. That's still available.
I had that.
Oh, what happened?
It was
It's on the list.
I had it on there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Is this going to be long?
Okay.
Oh, that's where it's at.
Come on. Come on. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm going to do this as quickly as I possibly can. We have a $9.27 million TID 25 loan arrangement that was put together a couple of years ago. We decided to spend it out over 4 years, maybe sort of a 4.5 year. You can see the columns shown on this revised draft of the TID plan. This is a one-time source of funds, which kind of affects the decision-making. That's why you don't see a lot of personnel benefit types of issues in here. We wanted this to be kind of difference-maker money, and the the TID 25 schedule will be approved along with the rest of the overall budget in one sweeping motion in June. So this is divided into sections A, B, C, and D. I think Lisa's going to talk briefly about section A and what the changes are there. Jen's going to talk about section C, and I'll make a few comments about section D.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm just going to call out a couple areas on section A around planning and design. The first is around the access, number 5, A5, access to advanced placement for students of color. That reflects our commitment within our OCR resolution to work with equal opportunity schools to increase student enrollment and also success in advanced coursework, specifically advanced placement. So you'll see a placeholder in 1920 there to continue that work moving forward if that is needed. Then the shaded areas, 6 and 7, we have been hearing in number 6 this idea around teacher team development and assessment redesign. It keeps coming up for us in the work moving forward for the framework. I'm hearing it at the teacher advisory group.
Jefferson sent an email on it just this week.
Okay, so good. I'm glad that that confirms that. It's this need that teachers really want to be sure that they are teaming effectively, they're using the right data, using the right assessments, what kind of formative assessments really tell them about their next instructional moves. And we wanted to put a placeholder of sorts in there to really acknowledge that need, acknowledge what they're telling us, and be able to support that. So that is direct support for teacher teams. And then Kate, to your point around planning for full day 4K. We have a director of early learning hired, and she is implementing her entry plan. She's doing lots of conversations and engagement of stakeholders, and we know that implementing full day 4K is a bit more than just extending the time period, right? So it's about really looking at the curriculum we're using, the creative curriculum. It's about the assessments. Is it the right assessment? Is that gold assessment right? We know that full day 4K will have some implications for our community sites out there. And the voices of our 4K teachers has been, those voices have been woefully underrepresented over the years. They are dying for a voice at the table. They really want to talk about quality and what they need. We have sort of been marching along for years with the operational pieces, the enrollment, where do kids go, who are the parents, what are the spaces looking like, and there's really much more to it that they're very eager to talk about. So wanted to put a placeholder in here to do that with Colleen, to do that with our community sites, to talk about high quality in both locations, and then develop a plan for what does it mean to go to a high quality 4K perhaps, full day program in designated sites. So we wanted to acknowledge that we are thinking about that. We think we have the right person, the right leader in place, and we really do owe it to those 4K teachers to finally draw their voices out and hear what they might need moving to that. So I hope that that helps.
I just wanted to touch base on the innovation opportunities. The placeholder for the next couple of years is 375K there. I mean, we can use this money for whatever innovations make sense. Rob,
Where's that?
it's line C1.
C1, okay.
But I wanted to alert you to the fact that if we were, for example, to continue the innovation we've started related to opportunity with the micro school at La Follette, that this would be the line that you could draw on for the upcoming year to continue that pilot if we decide that we want to do so, to try something else. I mean, it actually could be used for the full day 4K pilot, right?
It's a funny comparison because we moved very quickly to stand up a pilot with 15 children for Opportunity Youth, and full day 4K is something we've been talking about. I mean, I've been on the board for almost precisely 1 year at this point, since before I got on the board. We have children coming to school already. And while I appreciate there's much more work to be done than just extending the hours, some of the logistical work is in place. If we wanted to pick, say, a site for a pilot and learn, there's a huge amount of curricular work to do. There's a huge amount of listening to our 4K educators who have deep knowledge and a different kind of kid that they're supporting. Like, that's all there. I appreciate that. And I'm a little bit like,
you're eager.
Yeah,
I know.
I mean,
We
you
all
can tell
are.
I'm a little frustrated.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
I know.
You know, this is something that I think everybody in
Yeah.
the room wants to do in some way, shape,
Yeah,
or
me
form.
too.
So
Me too.
it's feels frustrating that we aren't on it more. So.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we'll definitely take that into consideration, Kate, as we're putting the final budget proposal together. And it's an interesting thing that we're trying to pull apart. Where is it that we're just implementing what we know about best practice? There's a large and deep field when it comes to 4K and fully 4K, like the CPC model in Chicago, which is highly effective. And in this opportunity use stuff where lots of people are experimenting, and I think the research base is probably not as strong. Nevertheless, I understand the urgency. There's a real need out there.
And we'll comment
but
very
just-
briefly on
yeah.
Section D, which is the technology section. It's about $2.2 million. 2.275 was originally allocated, of which about 1.5 million is remaining to be spent. This was created before we had an opportunity to quantify this E-rate Category 2 $3.6 million project, which, if we do that, we can probably reallocate some funds out of this technology line. So earlier tonight I mentioned health insurance, and in about 5 seconds, Dean figured out the savings, had me quantify it, and reallocated it. So in that spirit, Dean, here's another opportunity. We can probably move about $1 million out of that technology line and still be ahead of where we were.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That covers it?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
does anyone have any questions?
Are we doing B?
No, there's nothing really has changed in B.
Yeah, I got questions.
Yeah.
I just got one comment.
Dean?
All right, I've brought this up before, but I think we're missing an opportunity to get rid of some fixed costs in the buildings that we rent and buy a building and provide some of these opportunity programming or other programming in buildings that we own and manage ourselves, where we can then have complete control over what happens there. I think we're going to find a need to expand alternative site programming, and I think along with that should be a plan where we own these things and manage them, and I don't know where that's going to come up in here. Plus, I think there's opportunities here for us to solicit people to donate some of these things. The athletic equipment replacements, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to get folks to donate things, in all range of other areas too. So we've got fund developer positions, and I think it's not just grants, but I think people, we can ask them to donate money, as the community foundation suggested, as you talked about in your event that you were at. Well, there's, other than money, there's other things that they can specifically target for us that I don't know if we're doing that. Maybe someone can donate us a building. But anyway, there's, and the other thing, Mike, I'd like to see is we have other TIDs available coming up. There's a schedule of them. I don't know how many exactly there are. 10, are there, TJ?
There's 32 and 3. This is 25.
Yeah.
32 is going to bring us something this
It
year.
is.
Yeah,
Or
there's
next year.
there's
Next year.
more
32
coming.
will bring us.
That's
and I don't
right,
know how
Dean.
25 is going to play out, whether the 9 million, it's going to be more than 9, or, you know, there might be a bonus beyond what our loan arrangement is. But
And we'll
32
let it
will
extend
pass
one
on
more
something.
year for the affordable housing benefit. But we've got more scheduled coming reasonably soon that, and these are, you know, one-time shots that we can do one-time things with. And I, you know, we have to think bigger, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep, agreed. We'll talk about long-range facilities plan some more in a second, too.
TJ?
Yeah.
Just a quick comment, and some of this makes sense, and some of it is something I think that we need to be a little wary about. I went back and looked at the TID 25 schedule from the June budget from last year, and that had in the 2020-2021 line $845,000 of unallocated, unspent money. The TID 25 we have before us today has in the 2020-2021 reserve line 0, which means that we're spending this faster than we had anticipated. And you look at it and it's $50,000 here. The memorial program with access to AP was not included in this budget, even though it was elsewhere in the budget last year. There's a lot of places and a lot of good reasons why we're doing it, but I just think we need to be hyper aware that this was available, and we've been able to fund some pilots and some other, planning and pieces like that with it over these years, and whatever TID 32 gives us in the future, maybe we can do some of that too. But we should be aware that we're spending it down faster than we thought we would a year ago.
Are we, Mike? Only because I feel like we haven't spent some of the things
right
that we.
I mean, it's right there.
Well, October was the final one, but yeah.
The $800,000 of reserve was, you might remember, about 10% of the non-interest expense part of this.
Yeah.
And we didn't designate it for any particular year. It just said at some point, we're going to do this. So it was parked out there in year 4, at the end of the 4 years. But our understanding was that as soon as we identified needs, we're going to act on it. So I guess you could look at it either way. I don't think that.
I wasn't being critical. I was just saying that we should be aware. That's all I was. I mean, I wasn't criticizing. I was just saying that we should be aware. That's it.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Mary, if I can just say a few words to close this out, mainly about process. I did want to, because you guys were having a little back and forth about the referendum, and I was at all of those forums as well. We did say we would do it to prevent cuts, and we said that we would do it so that we would not lose momentum as a school district. So there was a commitment to no cuts, but also holding on to these kind of priority actions that would push our district forward. So I just want to remind everyone of that. The second is compensation has been our lead foot from the beginning. We said in the beginning that compensation is what we wanted to lead with. So I am looking forward to our conversations about base wage, our upcoming negotiations in May. You'll maybe have noticed that in that grid that Mike flashed with all the additive compensation elements, the one-time or the stipend for hard-to-fill areas was shaded or highlighted. That's because we know that's one of the levers that we can take in or out. Either way, it's going to go to compensation. We just need to figure out how, in what form. I was at the Dane County Superintendent's meeting on Friday. There was a big discussion and sharing of notes about what everyone is doing on compensation. And I think we're going to be quite competitive in comparison to the vast majority of Dane County districts. And that is the full intent. Because we don't want the small set of targeted actions to be in competition with what we want to do for our employees. In fact, I think our employees would hope that we could do all of it, right? And that's what we're striving for. How do we support the students and families, because that's what these targeted actions are about, and support our staff with salary increases. I do want to flag for you that this small set of priority actions, and they do include a small number of added positions, almost all school-based, with the exception of the director position for youth re-engagement. We will want to come back to you for possible early approval before June. My hope is that the compensation picture will have cleared up a lot by then, but it's important if we wait until the end of June for this small set of positions, again, largely school-based, we have a very hard time filling them with qualified people. Filling positions in July and August is not a good idea, and we're making a commitment, especially going into this year, that we're not pulling school-based people out of their jobs at the last second, which creates a lot of instability at the school level. So I'll let you know when we're forwarding exactly which early approvals, but I suspect that I'll want to forward the youth re-engagement position as soon as possible. Obviously, going to provide you the information that you need, and I heard those requests loud and clear, and by May, the remainder of any of those positions. But remember, compensation is going to be moving along a very similar track at a fast pace in the coming weeks. And the last thing I'll say is on amendments. When we present the budget book in just a couple of weeks, we'll go over that amendment process. And there's a lot of give and take with amendments, as you know. We love to work with board members on their amendments, right? Help you get the information that you need to shape them, to make sure that they're good and solid, with the likelihood that they will be approved. And we'll, of course, give you our opinions on those amendments along the way. So looking forward to sharing with you that process, especially given that we'll have a new board member who's never been through the process at all before, and still a couple of board members who this is your first full budget cycle. So that's it, Mary. Thank you. And thank you, you guys. All right, that's it. That's what we got. We're going to touch base on building excellence for 5 minutes, maybe, just to talk about process. That's what I promised, Mary, 5 to 10 minutes. And I think Chad and Andrew are here.
Are we adjourned?
Oh.
So,
All right, we're going to get started.
I don't think
yeah, we can't. We're not going to wait.
Being
So,
too
okay, let's do this thing up.
much of a timekeeper.
There he is. I said, yes, Andrew's racing down the stairs.
He's on tonight.
Okay.
To be on the road at 6 a.m.
Okay, so you guys have been at this since 5 o'clock, so we're not going to beat you up too much on long-range facility planning. We gave you a lot of material in December, and this slide, I think, at least captures that. There were high school reinvestment ideas, middle school options, although I think middle school could use some more work, and then some elementary strategies that were pretty involved, sequencing-wise. A lot to digest. I think also alternatives was in there and some other concepts as well. So that was December. This is kind of a brief little bridging conversation to get us to the next big lift in this plan, which will happen in July. Maybe Andrew can speak to this, but we think that given the complexity of the issues involved, the number of issues involved, the financial consequences of these decisions, that this is an area where it is best for us to lead and then listen. Meaning we want to bring you in July an evolved sort of version 2 of these December ideas that have been more fully developed, narrowed, costed, and thought through. Get the board's opinions, insights, observations about that, then on to public engagement. The public engagement we've done to date says, give us something specific to react to and we'll react to it. Please don't give us a broad array of choices and ask for input. Fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So that is where we think we're heading from December of 17. And I'm just going to skip to, I think, here. Embedded in our thinking is that for such a major lift that obviously requires special funding outside the operating budget. The next obvious window for that would be the November 2020 general election, which means that we're working with about a 2.5-year window from now to then, with some important intermediate steps. The board's key work on this with us is not the second end of that 2-year process, it's really the first year. So I think that is important to note. And then lastly, I think really it's this. We need to get in front of the board at Operations Work Group in successive months, basically July through December, to really hammer this work out and decide what we want to do, if anything. And so I think we know enough about the ensuing budget year to know that we can carve out this time. We think this would be the key window of time, and that's the forum in which to do it. So we are committed to doing that, and we'll be asking the board to make the same time commitment to stay on the schedule.
Fair warning. That's basically the
Yep.
message.
Okay. In the interest of time, we will leave it there. Please. Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm incredibly supportive of facilities investment and thinking through near-term and long-term. My real question / push would be, this is all marching towards the referendum as our major source of funding. I think we have other sources of funding that we could explore, either private funding or loans. I mean, we have almost no debt as a district, and so I just wonder if you could comment a little bit on those two paths and how they might speed up, slow down, how they could be used together.
Okay. I'll offer a brief comment on that. And here's my positive comment. I think that demonstration projects between now and November of 2020 that we can do and prove that we've done well and provided return, I love those.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I encourage that. And whether that is TID 25, TID 32, maintenance budget, or whatever else might come our way, I think we should look for those. Yeah, that's my initial reaction to that. I think that I would not immediately embrace the idea of two referendums, like an 18 or 19 and a 2020. And I don't think that's even what you were asking.
No, that wasn't it at all.
So
Yeah.
that was my caveat. Okay, I'll pause there.
So maybe then I'll feed it back as a request to be able to, in our next, whenever we discuss
Right.
next, to discuss
Right.
what some of those maybe demonstration type projects
Yes.
might be in the nearer term.
Yes. We have some funding discussions going on behind the scenes that are just not right for this forum.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I just want to say that very soon, I think that repurposing and even closing some of our facilities needs to be on the table. When we have schools that hovering around under 200 enrollment, and we have schools that are at approximately 50% capacity, going to deans about the spaces we're renting, that I think that as we go forth with the facilities plan that includes adding or improving facilities where they're needed, our public expects us to take a look at facilities that might not be needed or might not be needed in their current form. I think we need to get creative around things like this, that if we're renting facilities and, one of the issues is that people want a separate entrance, then maybe we invest in building separate entrances so that we can have two very distinct programs in a school with, because we have a lot of places where even all the, whether we look at our internal projections or we look at the external projections, these schools are not going to be anywhere near capacity in the next 20, 30 years. And so I think we owe it to people to look at those. Done.
Thank you.
Dean?
Yeah, following right behind TJ, your example of sequencing on the bottom of the other one, the one I'm looking at, where the last point is to move Mr. Mundo into Alice. That's a good way of describing sequencing, which I've never heard before, but that works for me. And along other opportunities like that, I'm all for.
Okay, well, I guess that wraps up facilities then? Long-range
July, it's
planning?
a big lift.
Till July, yeah.
Big presentation in July.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Jen?
However, if it's 90
Is there a
degrees, I'm
motion
asking
to?
for air conditioning.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're
I knew
adjourned.
that was coming.